Hello, my name is Greg Einfeld, and today I am sharing some information on the data that we're seeing with COVID-19, in particular in relation to the number of cases in Australia. And this is the first of a series of videos that we will be presenting on COVID-19 data, just to help people understand what the data really means. This video is presented by Lime Actuarial and Price Wizard. Now, the reason that I decided to prepare this video, the inspiration was this post that I saw on LinkedIn and similar conversations with other people as well. So this was a popular post, lots of comments, lots of likes, and it talks about cases doubling every 3 days, which I think is quite a common perception among people in Australia, that cases have been doubling every 3 days, and we'll talk about that. Now, doubling every 3 days, mathematically, that means 26% growth day on day in the number of cases. So let's have a look at whether that is actually the case or not. So this graph here shows the cumulative number of cases in Australia by day up until the 30th of March yesterday. The source of this is covid19data.com.au. Great website. I'd encourage everybody to go there. It's a voluntary service that some really good people have put together, and you can make a voluntary donation to support them as well, which I'd encourage everybody to do because it is a great service. I have no association with that service or with the people who operate it. Now, what did we see here? When we look at this graph, it's an exponential shaped graph. That means it starts small and then it starts to grow exponentially. And we did get this time from around let's say the 10th or the 12th of March, where we got to about 100 cases, and then we've seen that exponential growth since then. And that's the thing about exponential growth. It's a bit like compound interest, that once it starts to grow, it really grows quickly, and you can see that happening. And we did get that period with 26% growth in the number of cumulative cases. That's the total number of cases that had been reported up till a particular day. And you can see that right through up until a few days ago, and then it just starts to, I won't say go flat, but the slope, instead of increasing as you'd expect with an exponential chart, the growth just starts to taper off a little bit. It's not quite as steep in the last couple of days as it has been, and that is a sign that the growth rate is not as high as the 26% per day, which means doubling every 3 days that we did have. I've shown the same information here in numbers rather than a chart, and you can see that we were having this 26 odd percent growth every day, growth in the sort of the 20 to even high 20s, and a bit of an anomaly on the 20th of March. It was just under 20%. That was a data reporting issue where the government started collecting data at a different time of day, and as a result you got less cases that day, but the underlying growth still was around 26%. What you've seen in the last week is those growth rates coming down, and that's good news. Nonetheless, it still looks like on the chart it still looked like the numbers were increasing quite significantly. Now I want to present the same information in a different chart. This is, rather than the cumulative number of cases, this is the number of cases that are being reported each day. And we can see here that the number started to flatten out on about the 24th of March. A bit of a spike up on the 28th of March. Some extra cases reported in Victoria that day. But putting that one aside, we've had pretty flat number of new cases for about the last week, and it's even started to reduce in the last couple of days, and long may that continue. So some fairly encouraging news there when we look at the number of new cases being reported as opposed to the number of cumulative cases. And this chart will move around more than the cumulative chart will, at least in terms of percentage growth each day. So this is more of a leading indicator of what's happening. I think this is a much better chart to be looking at if you really want to know what's happening over the last few days, rather than the cumulative chart, which more people tend to be focusing on. So there's potentially some good news here, although some warnings which I'll come to shortly, some very important warnings. Now this chart here, this is the cumulative data on a logarithmic scale. So we take the log of each daily reading. It starts at day 1, which is about the 10th of March. That's when we reached 100 cases. Now what this chart allows us to do is we can see, is the slope increasing or decreasing? And if the slope is decreasing, as it has been for the last few days, that means that the growth rate is getting smaller. And that's what this logarithmic chart allows us to do. If the chart is a straight line, that means the growth rate is constant. So we did have that pretty constant growth rate of something in the mid-20s from about day 1 through to about day 15. And you can see in this chart the slope is flattening a bit, and as a result that's consistent with the growth rate falling. So that's good news as well. This here is all of the data in terms of numbers, including the new cases. So it's the same table I showed you before, and I've added in the number of new cases too, and once again you can see that those are dropping off in the last few days. So overall, there's some potentially encouraging news here, and the Prime Minister Scott Morrison has referred to that as well. But I want to say that there are 3 warnings I have about getting too excited, and we certainly don't want to declare victory on this too early. We're a long, long way away from that, because we need to get this number of new cases down to 0, not just down to 266. So there are 3 warnings that I would like to share with you, and one is, it's always possible that there are some anomalies in the data, so we need to wait till we have at least a few days of data that are showing a trend before we can draw any conclusions. The second thing is, I think that quite a bit of this reduction is from the less people coming in from overseas. And so that's good news, but what's really important is what's happening locally and the cases that are being transmitted locally, because that's where the next potential growth could come from. So we need to continue to watch this carefully, and in particular watch the number of cases that are being transmitted locally. It's a bit harder to get data on that's consistent around the country, but that's the key. And if that gets out of hand, then we could see these numbers start to tick up again. And that brings me on to the third point, and that is some of this reduction, no doubt, is also due to the measures that we've all taken and that the government has imposed upon us, and that's great that most people in the community are doing that. But we need to continue to do that for a long period of time, because if we don't, then we'll see that this will start to tick up again. So really, really important that everybody continues to heed all of the government's warnings and follow all of the rules, so that we can keep this trend going in the direction that it has been going for the last few days, and that we want it to go for the next few weeks and probably months as well. So thank you very much for that. That concludes today's video. If you have any questions, post them on social media and I'll look to respond. And we'll be doing more videos like this as well, so follow us on social media and you'll get visibility of similar videos looking at other issues around COVID-19 data as well. Thank you.